boys and girls. Mrs. Pecora here. We're back with reading I Survived Hurricane Katrina 2005. In our last chapter, we read about our hero Barry and the dog Cruz, who he rescued, how they went onto this car to try and get onto this dry roof to save them from this nasty water. So let's read and see what else happens to Barry in I Survived Hurricane Katrina 2005. And boys and girls, if you hear snoring, it's not me. It's my puppy Winston. He's laying on the couch next to me listening to the story. So if you hear some snoring, it might be him. Okay, here we go. I Survived. Chapter 14. The stars came out, more stars than Barry had ever imagined. Was one of them Beta Draconis, a Vico's secret star? Beta Draconis was a real star. Barry and Jay had found the name in an astronomy book in the library. They'd learned that there were trillions and trillions of stars in the universe, more stars than grains of sand on every beach and desert on Earth. They all seemed to be out that night. Barry searched the sky and picked out one of the very brightest stars. "See that, Cruz?" he whispered, pointing into the sky. "That's a Vico star." That probably wasn't true, but right then Barry decided to believe it. Cruz looked at the sky, and his brown eyes filled up with light. He and Barry leaned their heads together, and soon the sky seemed to wrap itself around them, a glittering blanket to protect them from the awful sights and sounds and smells of their ruined neighborhood. They sat like that for hours on their little dry patch of roof. A few small boats motored by. Barry called out, but nobody seemed to hear him, until finally one of the boats slowed down. It wasn't really a boat. It was more like a raft, a yellow rubber raft with a motor. The driver was a woman younger than Mom. She drove the boat right onto the roof and stopped it just a few feet from Barry and Cruz. "Well, look at you, brave soul," the woman said, her voice low and smooth. She had very dark skin and huge eyes and dozens of long, skinny braids that seemed to dance around her face. Barry stared at her, sure he was imagining things. She seemed like some kind of fairy, a beautiful fairy in a yellow rubber boat from one of Cleo's bedtime stories. But she was real, stepping out of her boat and wading up to Barry in tall rubber boots. She put a hand on Cruz's head. The dog didn't growl. Like Barry, he seemed hypnotized. "Who are you?" the woman asked. Barry's throat was dry and swollen, but he managed to say his name. "I'm Nell," she said. "Where's your family?" Barry looked around him at the endless water, his eyes filled with tears. Nell put her hands on Barry's shoulders. "How about we get you and your friend out of here?" she asked. "Sound like a plan?" Barry wiped his eyes and somehow choked out the word yes. Barry and Cruz climbed into the boat after Nell. Nell handed Barry a big bottle of water. She filled a cup for Cruz and held it while he lapped the water up. Barry gulped down his water, almost choking at first. When he was finished, he took a deep breath. He opened his mouth to say thank you, but the only sound that came out was a sob. Suddenly, tears were pouring down his face. He turned away from Nell. She had called him a brave soul, so why couldn't he act brave? He was finally off that roof, but now all the terror he'd felt those past hours came back to him second by second. He felt as if he was shrinking, as though his fear was boiling up inside him and he was melting away. "We're going to the St. Claude Avenue Bridge," Nell said. "There will be people to help you there." Of course there would be. Police and firemen, doctors and nurses. Barry knew what happened in disasters. He'd seen it on the news. He imagined a big tent on the bridge with cots set up in neat rows. He would get fresh clothes, more water, good food. The people there would know how to track down Mom and Dad and Cleo. Barry took a deep breath. Nell carefully wove the little boat through the maze of uprooted trees and wreckage. People stranded on rooftops called to them as they rode by. "Help us! We got a baby here! We're hurt! Please help!" Nell called back to all of them. "I'll be back," she said over and over. "Hang on there! I'll be back." She whispered a prayer under her breath. "There are thousands of people stranded just here in the lower 9, Nell said to Barry. "I've already picked up more than 30 people. Finally, the bridge appeared in the distance, and even from far away, Barry could see that there were no tents, no flashing lights, or police cars, or fire engines, or ambulances. Other boats, little boats like Nell's, pulled up to the bridge, let people off, then headed back out to the water. There were at least 100 people packed on the bridge. Families huddled together. Old couples sat on the ground. People walked around dazed. Was Nell really going to leave Barry there by himself? Chapter 15. Nell eased the boat onto the ramp that led to the bridge. Part of the bridge was underwater, but the middle part was high enough that it had stayed dry. Nell switched off the engine. "You'll be okay here," she said. "They're bringing people to the Superdome. Someone will help you there." Barry wanted to believe her, but he knew even before the storm hit, there had been huge crowds and not enough food or water. What would it be like now? And besides, they wouldn't let him in with Cruz. Barry's fears started to boil up again. A man came running over. "Pardon me," he said to Nell, breathing hard. "I'm trying to find my grandmother. She's out there, all alone, up on her roof. I need to get her. "I'll take you," Nell said. The man nodded, wiping away a tear. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you." Barry knew he had to get out of the boat. Nell had other people to help, like she'd helped him. Nell leaned over and put her hand under Barry's chin, lifting his face so he had to look at her. She didn't say anything for a moment. She just looked, sorry, boys and girls, Winston likes the book here today. Look at that. She just looked into his eyes like she saw something there worth looking at. "You're strong," she said, with no doubt in her voice. Barry didn't feel strong. His whole body shook as he got out of the boat. Cruz followed him. They stood on the ramp and watched as the man pushed the boat into the deep water. He climbed in beside Nell. Nell nodded at Barry, and he suddenly had the idea he'd never see her again. She powered up the engine, and the boat pulled away. As Barry watched Nell disappear, her words echoed through his mind. "You're strong. You're strong." And soon, it wasn't Nell's voice he was hearing in his mind. It was his own voice. "I am strong. I am strong." Was he? He was scared. He was standing there crying, his legs quivering like skinny little twigs in the wind. But did that mean he wasn't strong? Barry thought about what had happened to him, how he'd been swept off the roof and carried away, how he'd grabbed hold of that tree and climbed up, how he'd held on tightly against the wind and the rain, how he'd saved Cruz, how they'd made their way through the wreckage to that tiny dry patch of roof. He felt scared the entire time, but here he was standing on dry ground, in one piece. He looked up, and there was his bright star, Barry's star, and right then he knew that no matter how scared he felt, he'd find his way. Or someone would find him. An hour passed, and Barry heard a familiar voice. "Barry! Barry!" And then other voices calling his name together like a song. Dad reached him first, then Mom and Cleo, their arms wrapped around Barry. And they stood there together for a long time. The four Tuckers and Cruz, a tiny island in the huge sea. We're going to stop there for now, boys and girls, so stay tuned for tomorrow for our last chapter. See you then. Bye-bye.